All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm Joshua Ayers. I'm with the Food Safety and Inspection Service. That's an agency under the United States Department of Agriculture. We regulate meat and poultry in the United States, the food safety and the labeling of meat and poultry in the United States. We're not a quality agency. That's the Agricultural Marketing Service. I'm from a legal background, non-science background. I work with a lot of scientists in the agency, and I coordinate all of our activities related to building the regulatory framework for cell-cultured foods.
Hi, I'm actually Nazario-Toole. I am, sorry. That was a perfect start. So I'm a member of the Office of Food Additive Safety's Cultured Animal Cell Foods Pre-Market Consultation Team. So on that team, I work with firms by advising them and communicating with them and just kind of assisting them through the pre-market consultation process. So I have a Ph.D. in cell biology and molecular genetics, and I've been with the FDA since September of 2022, so right around the time where things started really moving with the animal cell cultured foods program. And but before that, I was a bench scientist. I was a sequencing and bioinformatics chief for the U.S. Air Force, the 59th Medical Wing in San Antonio. So this is my first rodeo.
My name is Eric Schulze. I'm from Upside Foods, formerly Memphis Meats, and I run our regulatory and public policy shop. Like Ashley, also a scientist. My PhD is in genetic, molecular, and cellular biology. And like Ashley, I worked at FDA as well, working on novel foods and drugs regulation. So it's been fun to meet other colleagues as well. And I've been running our regulatory program and starting most of the scientific divisions at Upside Foods, including our cell line division, our food safety division, our food division, and our quality division, and now get to enjoy selling our products on the market.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Vitor Santo. I am the head of cell culture R&D at Good Meat. So I've been with the company for almost 6 years now. So pretty much overseeing all aspects of R&D from the inception of the cultivated meat program when it was still a department within Eat Just. And now, a few years ago, we created the subsidiary. And essentially, I've been involved also in all aspects related with the regulatory submissions, both in Singapore and also in the United States, and in all the technical programs that were implemented to develop and plan the submissions.
Well, like I said, we couldn't have asked for a better panel for this discussion. So let's begin by asking some questions that'll be directed towards Josh and Dr. Nazario-Toole related to the regulatory framework for these products. So my first question is, and Josh, I'll begin with you. Actually, sorry, I'll begin with Ashley on this one. At what point should companies interested in commercializing cultivated meat or seafood reach out to FDA?
So you've probably heard us say this before, but we recommend that companies come to us early and often during your product development stage. We find that those dialogues are most helpful in helping us assist and walk through the pre-market consultation process.
And then the same question, but this time for FSIS, because a question that I get often is, okay, we know that we have to meet with FDA early and often, but when do we start meeting with FSIS?
You should reach out to us as early as possible, even before you've started the pre-market consultation process, and have an introductory meeting with the USDA regarding your company, your processes. Just give us an overview of your company, and we'll also give you an overview of what side of the regulatory process we handle. So we'd like you to reach out to us basically at the same time you reach out to FDA for an introductory meeting, and then you could have meetings with us while you're going through the FDA process just to get all your ducks in a row so that when you're done with that pre-market consultation, you've already got all the knowledge you need to begin the USDA side of the equation.
And so now that we've covered when to seek a meeting with the agencies, what information should companies provide during those initial meetings? And then, Ashley, I'll ask a question about the information that's needed for the consultation process in a couple minutes.
So in the initial meetings, we are really interested in learning about the production process. So when we completed our first two consultations, we walked through each firm's production process and discuss the hazards, the inputs, the cell lines. And so we are really interested in the science and also the firm's analysis of their own production process and the hazards that are inherent to it.
Okay, so that was really helpful. And you talked about sort of the different categories of information that you're interested in learning about during the pre-market consultation process. Can you sort of walk us through what sort of steps that are in the pre-market consultation process when a company should request a pre-submission meeting, and what steps it should take before it submits the formal submission?
So I'm going to couch this by saying that when firms come to meet with us, we like to see your description. We like you to walk us through the process and to discuss the hazards and any food safety and regulatory concerns that you might have or that may come up during this discussion. So we have a pre-submission stage. That is when we have those introductory meetings, and then we have iterative meetings throughout. So we are really looking to advise and kind of serve as a way for firms to make important decisions. And so we did this with our consultations with Upside and Good Meat, and we were very keen on understanding each firm's analysis of hazards and what they were doing to ensure that the food that they produced by their specific process was safe for human consumption.
Okay, and I know you're limited in your ability to describe every piece of information that must be in a submission because the agency is going through a guidance development process. And as much as I would love to ask you when that guidance will be issued, I also know from my days at FDA that you cannot answer that question. What happens if a company hasn't answered all of FDA's questions in the safety narrative, particularly after it formally submits the submission?
So we will not complete our consultation until all of our safety issues are addressed. That's the answer to that. We will not complete the consultation, but we will work with you, and we strive to help identify issues that are specific to the process that is that consultations process. But we won't complete it until all of our questions are answered at that time.
So it sounds like it's pretty imperative for companies to have pre-submission meetings with the agency where the company fully understands any remaining questions that the agency might have.
That is correct.
Okay. And if folks have any questions, please do put those questions in the questions page on Swap Card. I will be consulting those questions along the way, and we'll ask those questions as we move through this discussion. Josh, I'm going to turn to you. Well, there's the pre-market consultation process on the FDA side, which looks at the steps that Dr. Nazario-Toole described, particularly pre-harvest. We know that FSIS takes over its regulatory jurisdiction over the technology post-harvest. What requirements must a cultivated meat company meet to receive a grant of inspection, and what's your sense of the general timeline for approval?
Well, I won't go into the details about everything you need in your grant of inspection application. I will say that there's guidance online, and the guidance that we have for the conventional industry is immediately applicable to the cell culture industry. So you should look into that. We're going to want a HACCP plan, of course. We require that for all establishments, and we're going to want sanitation standard operating procedures. So those are the two big components of your grant of inspection. Having those and have us review them and have us sign off on them and say that we believe that they're going to mitigate the risk from this product becoming adulterated during the further processing, during harvest or post-harvest. So yeah, those are the two big components, and I would encourage you to look at the guidance for that. In terms of a time frame, for a conventional meat and poultry establishment, we're looking 3-4 weeks to 2 months, right? But this is a brand new area for both us as well as the whole country. So It takes us a lot longer. I forget how long it took for you guys to get through it. It was many months, I'm sure.
That long.
That long, yeah.
I don't think it was the months that you described.
Right. So we're talking a matter of months, not weeks. I would think that it's a more efficient now that these guys here have taken some of the hits for you. And we've got our process in place.
You're welcome.
But the thing that makes it where it's not going to be that 1 or 2, 3 or 4 week timeline like with conventional meat and poultry yet is that we're finding that every company's got doing things a little different at this point in the process. And there's not a lot of standardization yet. It's growing, it's evolving. We're going to see different processes next year and the year after. So it's not as easy as just going through some and then knowing what we're doing on the next one. And we have to take each one case by case. So I can't give you a time frame, but I'm going to say, if you're looking for less than 6 months at this point, that's quick. And a lot of it has to do with how quickly you're able to respond to us as well. The grant of inspection process is a lot of back and forth. We'll be asking you for a lot of information when we look at your packet, and it depends on how fast you can get back to us, is how fast we can expedite that grant of inspection.
Okay. Shortly after the Good Meat and Upside approvals, which were in June of this year on the FSIS side, of course, the companies completed the FDA pre-market consultation process. Before then, FSIS issued a number of directives, and if folks haven't read those directives, they're full of information and they're worth reading. One of those directives in particular talks about responsibilities and establishments that are producing cultivated meat and food products and poultry products, and it describes sort of an FSIS inspection at a high level. Can you share additional details with us about what an inspection might cover, recognizing that there are different production processes?
Well, that's a very detailed question, and I'm not a field inspector, but I will say that the frequency in which you're going to be inspected, we treat cell culture facilities like further processing facilities. So the frequency is once per operating shift. So if you're having one shift a day, you're going to harvest one day, you're going to further process some product. There's going to be inspectors show up at some point every time you do that, just like in a conventional meat and poultry product setting. In terms of what they're looking at, like I said, the grant of inspection, the two big components of that grant of inspection that you get is that you have a HACCP plan and you have sanitary standard operating procedures. So your processes and procedures that you provide to us, we're going to be using those as a roadmap, and we're going to be coming in and making sure that you're actually applying those when you do your harvest and post-harvest, like you've told us. And we're going to be doing that every day. It's an intensive inspection for meat and poultry in the United States. So we're basically going to be using your own processes and procedures and looking into those. There's also going to be some verification type activities that they look into. We have a system called the Public Health Information System. It randomly assigns verification procedures to our inspectors, so they might come in one day and say, hey, system told me I have to look at your labeling record today, even though you've already gone through labeling approval. I have to look in it, make sure you hadn't changing things up on us, et cetera. So you might get some random verification activities. And then there's also sampling that takes place, and we have a sampling notice out right now that explains what that sampling is looking like.
Okay. So for inspections, we've covered the grant of inspection process, the timelines that are now, and sort of the inspection basics, looking at a facility's HACCP program, their SSOPs. I want to now move to post-harvest processes and media components or other components that might be used post-harvest, like in a wash solution. Both Good Meat and Upside had submitted new technology notifications for components that are in their wash solutions, and this is all available on FSIS's website. In one of the directives that FSIS issued, the agency sort of emphasized that ingredients that are used in products post-harvest have to be considered safe and suitable under FSIS regulation or on 7120, which is FSIS's safe and suitable list for ingredients used in meat and poultry and egg products. What about grass substances that might not be listed in 7120? We've seen some flexibility with the agency on that. Is there any kind of...
Well, grass is an FDA process. We have nothing to do with that, except that we do coordinate with FDA through a MOU that we have with them. Like you said, ingredients that you're going to use in your final product, in your product formulation, they have to be safe and suitable. So FDA makes the determination whether an ingredient or an input that is going to be in that product is generally recognized as safe, meaning it's generally safe for use in food. But just because it's generally safe for use in food doesn't mean it's suitable to be in a meat and poultry product, because one, we have regulations about what can go into meat and poultry products, and two, sometimes an ingredient that might be safe is just not safe in meat and poultry. An example would be maybe a red dye that is generally safe, recognized as safe. We don't allow any kind of color additives in meat and poultry products because they mask spoilage and they mislead consumers. So we have to look at both the safety and the suitability. So we have a team called the Risk Management Innovation Staff at FSIS, and they do new technology review submissions. So if you're going to use an input or an ingredient in that final product formulation, you have to go through the suitability process if your input is not already listed in the directive that we have. So it's listed in there not only based on the ingredient itself, but its intended use in the product. So you would need to provide us with the ingredient and its intended use, and we get a technical review team together. That process takes about 60 days to get that approved.
Okay. And should that sort of review focus on post-harvest processes or not, or media components?
Anything in the pre-harvest production process that's not going to remain in the final product is purely an FDA concern. If it's something that you're going to use pre-harvest and then we're going to see it show up in the final product because it's not getting eaten up in the culture media or it's just not getting washed out, that's going to be considered an input, and we're going to need to be looking into that.
And Dr. Nazario-Toole, how are the agencies coordinating on that particular issue? Because we know that the media for these products is particularly important. There can be a lot of components in that media, and the formulation itself can be proprietary.
Right. So we have the MOU with USDA, and so we can share back and forth, discuss some of the information, but we tell the firms to speak to FSIS directly and to talk through the process the substance that is in question. And so we will defer to FSIS on anything that's present in after the harvest and the harvested material. If a component was used upstream, but it's present, FSIS.
Okay. So we've talked about the initiation of the pre-market process, inspection, and a grant of inspection, and how to evaluate potential new ingredients. And so now I want to move to a subject matter that I know everybody is interested in, and that is labeling. Can you, Josh, describe the process for obtaining a USDA label approval? And then I want to talk about sort of the generic label process.
Yes, give away all your secrets.
Yes. Remember when I talk about labeling, I'm talking about, from the USDA perspective, just meat and poultry. All right, there's a lot of seafood, for example, going on with cell culture, and that's purely an FDA concern, and they do the labeling for anything that's not meat and poultry as well, with the exception of catfish, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. If there's any catfish makers out there,
don't ask. Yeah. I don't think anybody's going to sell culture catfish anytime soon. So
never say never.
So labeling in the United States, for a meat and poultry product, every product label has to go through FSIS review and approval before you can use it on a meat and poultry product. Every single one. So when you want to get a grant of inspection, one of the prerequisites to get a grant of inspection is you got to get a label approval first. So you have to send that to our labeling staff. We have the large labeling staff. You can submit that electronically. They're going to want to look at what's called a sketch label, which means it's just a black and white draft of your label. They're going to look at all the language. There's different components that you have to have on there, the ingredient statement, the product name, et cetera. It's all in our regulations, and we have labeling guidance out there, lots of it, and it's all applicable to cell culture as well, though we are producing some new guidance for labeling of cell culture-specific products, which we expect to have out sometime in the fall. We are also developing some specific labeling rules for cell culture products. That's on the unified regulatory agenda to publish in the spring, but that will be a proposed rule. And if anybody knows the regulatory process, that means that's about another 4 months or so of comments, and then another 6 months of drafting, And
Can I
then
submit my extension right now?
yeah. So the final rule we're probably not going to see till late 2024, maybe 2025 at this point. Just depends how it goes. In the meantime, there will be guidance out. And like I said, you have to go through that labeling process. So they're going to take every label on a case-by-case basis. They're going to put some guidance out there for best practices, and they're going to approve your label. And they're going to have back and forth with you to make sure you get a label approved. It doesn't take that long to get a label approval at this point. I mean, they might have some issues with suitability reviews. Like we talked about, getting your suitability relates to labeling a lot of times. For example, if you have a binder or something like that in your ingredients, right? We might not let you label something a certain way because ground beef, for example, isn't allowed to have binders, et cetera. So there's some labeling implications with ingredients. But there's typically not as arduous as a process as getting the grant of inspection itself. So.
And so for the guidance that you're anticipating might be issued later this year, are you coordinating with FDA on that guidance?
Yes, we've sent that over to FDA and they've reviewed it. So we always share everything with FDA in terms before we publish it to get their comments on it.
Yeah, and I can't say that it's the Office of Nutrition and Food Labeling is working, and we focus on consistency and transparency, and just working with FSIS to make sure that the products, cell culture products, are labeled in a way that it's easy for consumers to understand.
And can you speak to the process for evaluating labeling on the FDA side? We know on the USDA side, or meat and poultry labels are subject to pre-approval under USDA statute, and that's been in place for quite some time. In contrast, on the FDA side, foods are not typically subject to pre-approval when it comes to labeling. So how, and I know OFAS doesn't opine, the office in which Dr. Nazario-Toole is in, the Office of Food Additive Safety within the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, is not the office that has oversight over labeling, but can you talk about the process for labeling for cultivated seafood? Or at least who companies should talk to and when?
I'm going to guess early and often.
They should reach out to the Office of Nutrition and Food Labeling. They are currently working through comments that they got in the request for information that was published in the Federal Register. They're still working on that. And that's the only real update that I have and can provide, is just reach out to them, Office of Nutrition and Food Labeling in SIFSAN.
And should they do that during the pre-market consultation process, or?
Yes, I think similar to what FSIS is recommending, come to us, come to Office of Food Additive Safety for the pre-market consultation, and go talk to ONFL, Office of Nutrition and Food Labeling, so that you have an idea of what kind of questions or what kind of stance they have.
So one question about after you get your label approval, and I also want to talk about post submission changes that can occur. FSIS has said that labels for cultivated meat are not subject to generic label approval. Generic label approval under FSIS, as Josh can talk about in detail, means that not every single change that is made to the label needs to go through the formal approval process, provided the language that's included on the label fits within certain previously defined categories.
Right. The general rule is that if you have a labeling, we have to look at it, right? Mm-hmm. But we approve labels in two ways. One, we look at what you actually have on the label, and we make an approval. The other way is we approve something very specific by regulation, so we just give a blanket approval, and that's because we've typically reviewed about 1 billion of these types of labels, and we've never found an issue with them, and we just don't want to waste resources on reviewing these things anymore. Things like organic certification in the ingredient statement, we very rarely find problems with that, and we have an entire other agency called the National Organic Program that looks at that anyway, so it's just a redundancy. In terms of generic approval for cell culture, the reason we put those generic regulations in place is because we have a lot of experience reviewing those types of labels, and we know that there's no problems. We don't have that experience with cell culture labels. So right now, we're not generically approving any cell culture labels. The only exception, and this is listed in 7800.1, the new directive we put out, is that we will allow you to change the net weight declaration on a product label without reviewing it. Of course, you might have various weights as you go through the process. Anything else you change, you just have to submit the change to the labeling staff. They're not going to review the whole label again. They're just going to look at what you changed on your label and approve a new one for you.
Okay. So moving to steps that might occur post the submission process. Companies, are optimizing their media, are figuring out sort of what sort of cell lines might be able to produce product in a way that is particularly helpful to the production process. And I'll begin with you, Dr. Nazario-Toole. What kinds of changes do companies have to bring to FDA, or how should they consider changes in the production process post-submission? FDA has a long-standing guidance related to significant manufacturing changes, and that guidance talks about things like, well, if you make a change that changes the identity or safety of the product, then you might have to come to FDA for a consultation. But can you tell us more about how that would be applied here?
So any company that is considering making a change to their production process, we would ask them to consider the effects of that production process on the identity and composition of the cell culture material, and consider whether or not the changes change the conclusions that the company had during their consultation, during the completed consultation, that their product was safe. So we ask that companies consult with us before or during that the ideas of whatever process change that you are considering, to discuss with us, some of the potential for the perhaps expression products or things like that to be in the final material. So we want to ensure that companies come speak with us. If the conclusion does not change that your product is safe for human consumption and that there's no change in the composition or identity, we ask that companies submit supplemental information to us that describes that process change and that also provides some evidence supporting the conclusions still that the company, that the food is safe. If a process change does result in the identity or the composition of the final product changing, that might result in having to come through the pre-submission and the consultation process for making that subject of a new consultation.
And you might not be able to answer this question, but can you tell us about what kinds of changes FDA might consider to be significant?
I'm sorry. I unfortunately cannot actually say specific changes. We have 2 completed consultations on our inventory, and I'm going to, point you all to those and just say that they provide some framework that you can kind of work through to understand the kinds of things that FDA may or may not ask for, and it's part of a supplement. But regardless, just come talk to us if you're considering a process change after a completed consultation, and we will kind of walk through that with you.
So now I'm going to turn to those 2 companies that have those submissions in the inventory. First, congratulations to Upside Foods and Good Meat for successfully completing the regulatory process in the U.S., including without any formal written guidance or regulations in place yet. We know that was no small feat.
No shade to the agencies in part.
So Eric, I'm going to begin with you. How did you decide that your product and production process were ready to go through the pre-market consultation process?
So this is interesting if you're running a startup, because part of what you have to do is predict out when your brand new process that has no playbook and you have never had to do this before is ready for regulatory review. Also married to the early and often approach that they're completely right about. So for us, when we believed we had a process that would scale one-to-one from the process we were working at currently. So the production modality we had, when we knew that that would translate up in scale, is when we knew we had a process that could lock in for review. That said, also, while our review process for FDA was a little under 12 months from start to finish, we had almost 5 years of working with the agency to set that work up. And then concurrently, we were working with USDA for the same amount of time, roughly, in anticipation of the grant of inspection and the label. So the short answer is, once you knew the process scientifically would scale up 1-to-1 from the scale you're working on, and then, of course, having a locked-in process is the most important aspect.
And Vitor, same question to you, if there's anything you want to add to what
Sure.
Eric just said.
Yeah, so I think there's 3 elements, right? One of them, of course, making sure you have a cell line that you believe is robust enough to fit the regulatory requirements, and we believe we had that. Second thing was obviously the media composition and the process itself. So making a sort of in-house assessment, a safety assessment, making sure that the media components we were using for the culture process would also meet the safety requirements, and we believe we were in that position. And then the third element was also actually producing multiple batches at already a pilot scale. At the time, we were doing a lot of 500 and 1,000-liter bioreactors. We had a long history of success with those runs. So we believe we were in great shape to file. Obviously, we also had initiated the process, and we didn't have the approval yet in Singapore, but we were pretty close. So we had already started engaging as well and put together a safety assessment for other jurisdiction. But we believe we were in a good shape to also file in the U.S.
And how did you go about sort of figuring out what kind of information to put in your safety narrative? And Eric, I'm going to ask you the same question, especially in these early days.
Yeah, so I think for us it was, we took inspiration from a lot of regulatory processes that exist both in food and also in biopharmaceuticals, right? So again, focusing a lot on the safety of the cell line, the establishment of the cell banks, and creating robust sections around those. Then describing the process in detail and really focusing on what are the risks and potential roadblocks and challenges, and making a good description and a food safety plan and risk assessment around those. And then ultimately also describing the products. So what are we harvesting? And of course in the US we have the double jurisdiction, so we have the FDA and USDA, so more focused on upstream production for the cells. We characterize the harvested cellular product. That's something we also spent quite some time. And then once we engaged more on the downstream side with USDA, we also had a lot more information on the finished product.
Yeah, and I'll add to that very good answer. We split everything down from pre-production and production. And then we did a risk assessment on both and mapped that to the existing policies that already happen to exist. And it's often said that the U.S. regulatory system is overly complicated, with the open-face sandwich, closed-face sandwiches, and pizzas with pepperoni, what have you. Pick your analogy. But I actually think that's the strength of the U.S. regulatory system. It has many tools in its toolbox, and you can use them as long as you mix and match them appropriately and support them. So for us, it was marrying the risk assessment that was based on science to a legal analysis and regulatory thinking, and then proposing that with our agency partners, and then coming to an agreement that's satisfactory for everyone that established human food safety.
So in both of your answers, and I think throughout the whole panel, we've heard this theme about meeting with the agencies early and often and having these pre-submission conversations. To the best of your ability to say publicly, how did those communications with the agencies during the regulatory process inform your business decisions?
I mean, they were integral at every step. As a startup, again, one of the things that's really nice about being at a startup, and I'm saying this as someone who used to work in the government, the largest employer in the U.S. to the tiniest, was the ability to pivot. And I know that word is overused, but I think this idea of being able to adapt your business practices is really important when it comes down to what's going to be held regulatorily. And on top of it, I want to give credit where credit's due. The agencies were also quite nimble and well as adapting to the information as it comes out. So I think that's that, because we had business priorities that we wanted to have. As for example, we wanted to launch with chicken. And so that was a really important process for us to get through regulatorily. So I think it was actually just quite a bit of back and forth and being willing to compromise on both sides.
Yeah, on our end, definitely it was very important to engage early because those discussions allowed us to make some process adjustments as well. Some, for instance, small details on the composition of the culture media and fine-tune some concentration of components that then during the pre-market consultation process we managed to adjust, and that's the process that we launched and we have been producing with. So in our case, it was not something that I wouldn't go maybe as far as a business impact per se, but I would say maybe there are companies out there that if you don't engage early, there might be some roadblocks in your technology and in your process that if you don't identify those early on, you might have problems later on. So I do think that it's very helpful and critical for the success of the business from a very early stage.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And now that you've successfully completed the process, what sort of key tips would you give to other companies in this space that might be, at the beginning of the process or somewhere in between?
Yeah, I don't want to sound too repetitive, but definitely engage early. I would say
early and often.
I think that's an advantage in the U.S., right? I think that the openness for communication is a great thing, and I think companies should take advantage of that and implement that in the process. I would say also simplify the process. Maybe, sometimes that's my personal take, but sometimes we see cultivated meat approaches that can be quite complex, and I do think that in these early stages is advantages if you have a process that is more simple and that can be safer and can give you that first approval, and then further down the line you can further continue to develop the technology. So for me, that's an advice that I would give to the companies.
Mine is, if you can't sell your product, it doesn't matter. So if it's unsafe, for example, it doesn't matter. So I think investing in regulatory practices very early on, in fact, baking your regulatory practices into your R&D budget as a startup is incredibly important, that not enough companies do. A non-R&D spend, I know, is highly frowned upon in the startup community. And I would say reg might as well be moved right under R&D. Hiring those people and getting that thought process in early as you design your product and process, and then bringing that to the agency can save you millions of dollars on the back end that you will not have to redo if you're thinking about reg during your initial product design.
And also, I would say a strong quality team. I think it's in all these processes, it's really important to have their support, not only on the technology itself, but then when we move as well into facility requirements and setting up those for success, that's a critical part of the process as well.
And I'll add one, since you had a business practice, I think that was really good, is also having reg-savvy executives on your team as well. I think that's also the people that have worked in the food industry and understand the regulatory practices as well is really important.
And Josh and Ashley, other than early and often, is there another tip that you might give to this audience that we haven't covered?
Be forthcoming with information. Understand that we, even under Freedom of Information Act regulations and the statutes, we can protect your confidential business information. A lot of people that we've dealt with, even in just introductory meetings, are very hesitant to talk to us about certain aspects of their production. And that's reasonable, but when it comes to actually getting through the process, we need the information we need, or we're not going to get you through the process. So just be forthcoming with information that we need, get back to us as soon as you can, keep in touch with us to let us know where you're at on getting that information so we have a good status on where you're at with that, and just communicate back and forth and give us what we need.
Absolutely. I echo that 100%. And we understand that every process is unique, and that there are elements of process that you may consider confidential trade secret. We would ask that you are as transparent and open with us and provide us the information that is needed for us to evaluate the safety conclusions fully. If you have, so in our completed consultations, you see what they provided: batch analyses, specifications. Those are things that we evaluated as part of our to come to that no questions at this time letter. So I would definitely encourage everyone to please review what has already been the completed consultations.
And so we've got just a couple minutes left. So if folks have any burning questions that we have not covered, please add them to the chat. Oh, we actually have one. Let me phrase this the right way. So we've heard a lot about immortalized cell lines that have the ability to reproduce beyond the Hayflick limit. I'm going to start with the companies first. How did you think about that, and how did you sort of respond to or think about some of the ideas that were being thrown out there early on, analogizing an immortalized cell line to something that had cancerous potential, carcinogenic potential?
Right. Well, again, we know you can't knowingly introduce tumorigenic material into the meat and poultry supply, right? That's something you can do. So so that's not happening here. You eat immortal cells every day, whether they be plants or animals. And we go to great length in our dossier, and I know Good Meat does as well, to talk about this concept because it is important. And this idea of how immortalization and transformation or cancer are separate concepts. Cells that can grow, that are under control and responsive to our staff's inputs. Do they do what we say they will do? Does not render a food product unsafe. In fact, the opposite. It says it is safe. But it is normal to consume immortalized cells in the human diet. And our products are, again, like I said, because of FDA and USDA's review, as safe as other foods we consume. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else.
I would say also the strength of this approach is that you have established cell banks that you can create a very robust safety data set around. So you're not likely to change master cell bank often, right, for a certain for the cell line that is under scrutiny. So for us, it was very critical and important that we characterize those cells very well to build a safety narrative that indeed demonstrates that these cells are not tumorigenic. So we made sure that we had that information in-house and we have that information available, and we provide it in the consultations as well. So that is something that, and also we have additional safety narratives around additional killing steps, even if for whatever reason those cells were cancerous, how that would not be a safety concern. But it's also an optics discussion more than a safety discussion, in my opinion.
Okay, one last question for each of you, and Vitor, we'll begin with you. Where do you see the cultivated meat industry in a decade? Apparently, it's also going to the moon, I learned today. But other than that, yeah.
To the moon, I don't know if it's in a decade, maybe in a couple. But I think, I hope that we see cultivated meat in the grocery stores, multiple supermarket chains. I think we're going to see a few cultivated meat companies reaching commercial scale and having this product at, if not at price parity, very close to it. I think it's definitely... we're going to be talking more about the quality of the product and less about the technical challenges and how to actually make it work and scale. So I think we just got to keep building what we started. And I think there's a lot of examples, not only here, but people that I saw presentations today, a lot of companies around the world that are doing the good work. We just got to keep pushing. But I'm confident that that's the direction we'll see in 10 years.
My hope is that we see intense competition with the conventional meat industry. Like, I want to see like price parity, and that we're actually competing like on market. And then just from a scientific standpoint, I think it would be great to see some of the technologies bow back and arc back into biomedical solutions. I think a lot of this industry is born out of the pharma processes for the last 30, 40 years, which bore us. And I think some of the things that we've developed will bow back into the pharma industry, into biomedical therapeutics. And that, again, will create this cycle where I think we'll see even more interesting food technologies evolve. But ultimately, on a very practical level, I'd love to see this competing price-wise globally against other cultivated companies and conventional meat industry.
And I know this is a hard question for both of you to answer, so I'll modify the question a little bit. Where do you see sort of the regulatory framework, and do you think what the good work that the U.S. agencies are doing can help shape other countries' regulatory processes?
We'll have more guidance out in the future. I expect if you come back a couple of years, you'll see a lot more guidance, some more rules. On the FSIS side of thing, our food safety inspection framework is very malleable. All right, so we don't see a lot of need for updated food safety inspection regulations. This fits nicely into that. The labeling regulations will be in place in a couple of years. And in terms of working with the foreign countries, we work regularly. We just met with Thailand last week. We've met with Singapore, Japan, Israel, some people in the European Union. So we meet with them regularly to discuss how we regulate it, learn how they regulate it, and we give that back and forth. We also work with the FAO, do some technical reviews and things like that with them. So we're continuing to talk with foreign governments.
So we are working on guidance, and the day it publishes, it will be,
glorious.
The glorious for me. A very relaxing day. My stress will go, whew. But I think that, we are continuing to work with industry to support innovation, but ultimately the goal is to make sure that the food is safe for human consumption, and if you're making products for animals, you would work with our counterparts at the Center for Veterinary Medicine. We will continue to adapt and learn when we speak with you, and so when the guidance publishes the draft guidance, feedback is really important for us, and we'll evaluate the comments that come in on that, and then hopefully we'll be able to kind of move forward in a developing this framework with feedback from industry.
Thank you very much. Well, we are at time. We're actually over time. We're not over time. Oh, I don't know how to read a clock, apparently. Oh, and there's more questions in the chat. I am really killing this.
Former FDA people, former FDA.
I know. You should be impressed that I know how to use this iPad, quite frankly.
Paper. Current FDA.
Okay. As I find these questions with my adept technological skills, let me ask Vitor a question, which is, you had mentioned your Singapore approval prior to the U.S. approval. Can you speak to sort of how the company navigated the regulatory frameworks in two different jurisdictions at the same time?
Well, it was a lot of work. We started earlier in Singapore, so I will say that has benefited us to put together the package for the U.S. So in a way that was helpful. The processes were a bit different, so in a way it's difficult to compare. But we took the approach of starting in the U.S. with the same process that we received. We went through consultation in Singapore and we received approval. So that was our decision. So in that way, that really impacted how we went commercial in the U.S. We have other processes that we have been working on, and in Singapore, for instance, we even received earlier this year the serum-free process amendment approval as well. So that's something that obviously we will also follow up in the U.S. But just saying that the two kind of influenced each other, and we just have really to adapt a little bit to what each jurisdiction asks. And I will say sometimes the technical content can be quite different. One thing, just going back to your previous question as well, when we deal with other jurisdictions, oftentimes we always got the question, when do you guys get the news from FDA? When is the U.S. releasing the guidelines? So I will say these consultations and the guidelines that will be published soon will have a tremendous impact worldwide, because we did get that sense from different geographies and different countries that people are looking out for what the U.S. is regulating.
I will second that. The international harmonization efforts regulatorily often are a reaction to the U.S.'s decisions. for better or for worse. So we have the same thing as this idea of what is FDA and USDA, what are they going to say, and when will they say it, and then we will make a decision. So again, that's why I thought it was so important that we get approvals out the door so that we could begin the harmonization process internationally.
Really great insights. We have some really very, very good questions. I'm going to begin with one that actually I think provides a good example of the importance of the U.S. regulatory framework. And Josh, the question is for you. Can you, we know that both companies used the term cell cultivated. Can you say more about sort of expectations for labeling right now that goes through the approval process? If, for example, a company wants to use a term that might be in a standard of identity, like burger, ham, or sausage.
If you can meet the existing standard of identity, you can use it. That's how it is. There are some that are going to be harder for you guys to meet than others at this point. If you're going to use binders in your product, you're not going to have ground beef, right? You're not going to have a burger if you use binders in your product because we have a legal definition for these things, right? So you're going to have to use a more generic term like patty or a chicken nugget patty or something like that. We have decades worth of labeling experience. This is not unique to your products. We have a lot of people who try to form products to look certain ways using comminuted product. I mean, right now the versions we're seeing from companies all over that they're showing us are sort of like comminuted formed products. So we have all kinds of labeling regulations, how you have to label those formed products. If you make a wing shape, right, you can't call it a wing, you got to call it a wing-shaped formed something, right? Because it's not actually a wing. So we have, you guys are not unique in this respect. We've got these labeling regulations in place for that kind of thing. Our labeling staff can guide you through what you need to call it in terms of that.
And so conceptually, if there is a standard of identity that's pre-existing that might be for a comminuted product or something similar, at least in theory, a company might be able to fit within that standard of identity.
In theory, if you can meet the standard, you can call it that. It's going to be very unique when we get to parts and cuts type terminology. People, the consumers, expect a ribeye to be a ribeye. That's a cut, right? Doesn't mean you can't say ribeye shaped or something like that. So we have to review those on a case by case when you come through. We do have existing precedent, like I said, with formed products. So it's probably going to be a lot of the same type of stuff we see there. But yes, if you can meet a standard of identity, then you can use it.
And in terms of, I like this ribeye shape. It's really conjuring up lots of thoughts in my mind. What about labeling of hybrid products? So now we're also seeing products that are going to that their intent is to be used with a plant-based product. They're not going to fall under the thresholds, I don't think. So right. It's not going to be open, closed-face kind of situation.
Yeah, that's important to understand. There are some products that have meat and poultry in them, that have so little meat and poultry that they're FDA-regulated products. These are typically products with like 2 to 3% meat or poultry in them that are mixed with plant-based things. When it comes to fat, I think it's up as high as 30%. So if you have like a soy-based product that has some fat in it, we don't regulate that until it's up to 30%. But if it's a meat and poultry product, it falls under our jurisdiction. I'm sorry, what was the question again? Hybrid products.
Yeah.
Yes, there's going to be a lot of hybrid products in this area, I expect. And those are multi-ingredient products. We deal with multi-ingredient products all the time. So we have all kinds of labeling regulations already in place to how those need to be labeled.
And do you think there's going to be a requirement for a percentage disclosure or suggestion?
I don't think so. I think that we require order of predominance in the ingredient statement, right? So if you have more cell culture chicken than you do soy, right, you're going to list chicken first, right? Cell culture chicken first and then soy. I don't believe that order of provenance translates to the principal display panel or the product name. I don't believe that's what our current guidance is. So if you had like a soy and pork, cell cultured pork nugget, it would be soy and cell cultured pork nugget patty or something like that.
It would be disclosed in the product name.
Yes, it would definitely be in the product name.
Right. There are companies that are focused on the hypothetical that you described where they would be producing fat and adding it with plant-based ingredients. I know FSIS at a certain point took the position that even in those cases where the product was being harvested, the agency would potentially want to play a role.
Well, we oversee we have a regulatory jurisdiction over the harvest process and over post-harvest processing. So if you're harvesting fat, right, that's 100% fat that you're harvesting. So that's a product we want to oversee the harvest of that fat. That's technically under our regulatory jurisdiction. So we actually have to send an inspector out and watch you harvest that to make sure it's not being adulterated while you're harvesting it. After that, if you're going to further process it into products that contain less than our jurisdictional threshold, it's going to go back over, and FDA is going to have oversight of that process.
Okay. But the harvest of the fat from the cultivator or bioreactor is something that would be subject to FSIS requirements?
Yes.
So we're sort of talking about, going back to the ribeye-shaped product, that firms in this space have been busy defining sort of a new category of food products. And the agencies are thinking about applying pre-existing rules to these products, which is the way that regulation always works. When you have a new technology, the agencies consider how that new technology might fit under the pre-existing regulatory paradigm, unless Congress steps in and legislates. Can you speak to, and Josh, this is for you as well, if the agencies are sort of contemplating making new categories for these products?
Not at this time, no. We could always promulgate some new standards of identity. We could promulgate some new labeling regulations. We don't have any plans to do that at this point. Right now, we're going to be proposing product name regulations in probably the spring, just so that the consumers know that this is different from the conventional product and they understand the underlying process of how it's made. But yes, we can promulgate new regulations. We don't have any plans to do that at this time. We're going to get through this rulemaking first, and then we're going to look and see where the industry's at. And then if there is something the industry knows that they want changed, we have a petition process laid out in our regulations where you can actually petition the agency through a formal process, and we have to analyze it and respond to it. So I would encourage, if you know anything that you want in that respect, to petition us.
So I'm going to move back to a question that we talked about earlier, which relates to components used pre-harvest and how that might affect labeling, and the agency's coordinating on that. I don't think neither Good Meat nor Upside uses scaffolds in the products that went through the regulatory process. And so a question that we have from the audience is, if a company used a scaffold and it presumably remained in the finished product, would that require special labeling, and what would it consider?
we would consider that likely to be an ingredient, right? Depends on the scaffolding, right? If it's like a soy-based or a plant-based scaffolding, you're not going to find that in traditional meat and poultry products. So it's going to be an ingredient, and it's going to have to go through a new technology review process, the suitability process we just talked about, which takes about 60 days if it's not already in there in the directive. And then I would imagine it would have to be listed as an ingredient or something to that respect. But yeah, it would show up in the label in some respect.
Now, what if that scaffold was made from an ingredient that's on your 7120 list?
Still show up in the labeling, but you wouldn't have to go through the suitability review. But again, the suitability review is the ingredient or the input and the intended use. So if you have an ingredient in there that you're making your scaffolding out of, right, but it's never been used in that way before, they're going to want to do a new technology review to make sure that it's being used in the right way.
There's sort of an additional industry that is arising to help in this space that's focused predominantly on media and maybe some kind of scaffolds being made. How should those companies interact with the agencies? Because they're not making a finished product that you can say would go through the pre-market consultation process, but they are making something that would be used by the Upsides and Good Meats of the world. And I imagine the Upsides and the Good Meats of the world want to know that those products can be used in their products in the first instance. So How about that sort of sub-industry?
So for companies that are interested in B2B, business-to-business transactions with companies that manufacture meat, we want to talk to them too.
Early and often?
Yeah, come see us. Animal Cell Cultures Foods at fda.hhs.gov. We ultimately, the pre-market consultation, the firm that is the primary producer, they will go through the pre-market consultation process. If they choose to use materials or inputs that were developed by another firm, they need to ensure that those materials are safe and that the resulting product is safe, and that they need to present their conclusions to us and the evidence that supports that. So we would say that companies that are in that space developing should come to us to understand the kind of considerations that would eventually go into the pre-market consultation dossier or safety narrative.
And to the extent you can answer this question, what sort of submission would they give to you? And especially if that is particularly proprietary, would that be in a food master file? Is that dependent upon the particular case?
So I would say please email us. All of that's probably it's case-by-case basis. And we would just want to walk through, if you are a media producer, the ingredients. We would potentially use a food master file. That is one option. But we don't have right now, I can't say exactly what the process would be. So we can take those kinds of questions through our general inbox and then consider and provide a response to each company.
And would this also hold for cell lines, production cell lines as well?
Yes, same thing. So if any firm that is interested in participating in this cultured meat space, but that is not the primary producer, come see us. Cell lines, media, scaffolds, come talk to us.
So we have another question here that I think is pretty interesting and is a subject we haven't talked about before, which is the pre-existing sort of programs that are administered by AMS, which I know is not the Food Safety and Inspection Service. It's the Agricultural Marketing Service of USDA. So Josh, to the extent you can answer this question, can cell-cultivated meat companies participate in the certified beef program managed by AMS? That's an interesting question. We made him laugh.
I don't know. I really don't know. They have so many. We're talking about quality and grading type things.
Can we get grade A, cultivated, ribeye shaped?
I don't know. Let's see. If you're a multi-ingredient product, for one, are you even eligible for that? I wouldn't know. But we're talking about, these are typically quality determinations about whole cuts of meat, right? So it's going to be tricky, and I'm not well versed in the Agricultural Marketing Services quality programs for meat. I worked in the vegetable space at one point, but yeah, I just don't know yet. But I would ask the Agricultural Marketing Service.
Okay.
A nice email.
Let me ask a question back to the companies. Thinking about the theme of this conference overall, what would you change about the U.S. regulatory process to accelerate it while also bringing safe and delicious cultivated meat to consumers? And I know it's tough because you're sitting next to FDA and USDA, so this is like a trick question.
I would say if I could have a guidance and some rulemaking. That's basically it. It's the thing that matters most to both. I remember being as a regulator, but also as a company, it's predictability on both sides. Everyone wants a predictable process. It's great when processes are updated. They should be. Policy should change. That's normal, especially in scientific information. However, that it has to be telegraphed and predictable, and companies need to plan years out. So do regulators. So I think that's the most important thing is how can we work together to continue making this as predictable and frankly, like almost fill in the blank as much as that's possible for companies that are getting into this space that want to bring a safe product to market. I know that's not necessarily possible, but I think the predictability.
Yeah, I second that. I think also, we, especially in these early submissions, we're navigating this interesting space between food products and maybe using cell culture processes that are more traditionally associated with biopharmaceuticals. So the standards of safety, sterility, and are very high, and that's something that I think over the years it's likely there might be some adjustments there, I suppose, because in terms of food production, I think the standard will be slightly different. But I guess that's something that will happen over the years.
And so we've spent a lot of time talking about, I think, processes in U.S. facilities. We're getting some questions about foreign facilities that would import product into the U.S. And it's sort of a two-part question. One, and this question is for you, Josh, can you talk about that process right now, particularly eligibility, and you might have to explain the eligibility framework for our audience.
Yeah, this fiscal year particularly, we're going to pivot our focus a bit towards imports and exports because we are getting a lot of interest in imports and exports. Exports are not going to be that difficult. Exports, it's America. We'll sell you anything. As long as you meet our regulations, we'll let you ship it out, unless a foreign country has come and told us that there are specific requirements. We have an export library where the countries come to us and they say, hey, we have specific requirements for these types of products. We've not received anything from anyone so far. So as long as you meet our regulations right now, we'll certify it. The Food Safety Inspection Service will certify it that it meets our regulations. You can ship it out. They might not accept it at customs when you get to the country, so look into that. But we'll certify it because...
So you'll issue a certificate, an export certificate?
Unless we have something from some foreign country that says they don't want us to send it there, we really don't have any basis not to let you send it somewhere, really. So as long as it meets our regulations, But,
and it's gone through the FDA.
As soon as you send it somewhere and they start turning it away at the border, we'll probably get a call from some country saying, hey, add this to your export library. Check with the importing country as well. In terms of imports into the United States, we have a process called international equivalency. So we require the Food Safety Inspection Service actually has to go out and do what's called an equivalency determination for a country, for a foreign nation, to determine that its food safety inspection system produces the food safety outcomes that are equivalent to the United States. They don't have to have the exact same system we have, but we have to make sure that they have those food safety systems in place. This has to be done on a product-by-product basis, and by that I mean a big product category, so beef, chicken, etc. Cell culture is a separate category. No one is currently equivalent for cell culture anything in the world right now. We've had some interest from Israel. We've had some interest from Singapore, which looks like they're very serious. And what they do is they come in and they submit an equivalency request. All right, we have to develop equivalency standards, which we actually have in place going through clearance right now. And our international equivalency staff, once they go get a formal request, they work with that foreign nation to deem them equivalent. They actually do a review of all the information that they request, and then they actually send auditors out to the country to look at some establishments over there and make sure they're actually those food safety systems are actually being imposed on the company. So once that's done, there has to be a Federal Register notice, so there has to be a drafted notice that goes in the Federal Register that lets you know that this country can now import this particular product to the United States. And then that country is added to our website. We have an import library as well, which lists countries and what they can import. So I expect that we will probably see some equivalency determination at least get started sometime in the next 12 months, I would imagine. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know for sure.
Okay. And what about inspections in those foreign facilities? That would be, assuming we get an equivalency determination, whether it's from Singapore, from Israel, or maybe Thailand, who's very interested in this space too.
We do 100% reinspection of all meat and poultry products that are imported into the United States at the border. So FSIS inspectors are going to intercept that at the border, and they're going to inspect that product. They're probably going to do some sampling of that product as well.
Okay. And on the FDA side, recognizing limited resources, but foreign facilities that are going through the bio process, is there anything you can speak to about that? They would be subject to U.S. law.
Right. I mean, come see us.
No.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think, FDA, any cell cultured product that is going to be consumed by in the U.S. or that even is going to be sold in this market, it needs to come through our process. So if you're a foreign company and you are interested eventually, come see us and talk to us.
Very helpful. I asked my question that I was going to ask each person to address before we closed in our false close. And now we have a real close because this is a countdown, I've learned. So my real close, Eric and Vitor, you talked about how the regulatory process could potentially be improved in a masterful way in front of FDA and USDA. Can you talk about what is a current requirement in the U.S. process that has been particularly helpful to you?
Good question. I think that, again, all the discussions we had throughout the review process has allowed us to fine-tune the composition of our culture media. That's the first thing that comes to my mind, because that was the thing that changed slightly during our consultation. So I would say the way that we had to fine-tune our safety assessment and toxicological assessment was really critical, and having that discussion shaped our program. So I would say that has been keeping that and investing more on that side of things will definitely boost the implementation of proper safety assessments. As I mentioned earlier, I think we're navigating still that the fact that we are still in the interface between the food products, and oftentimes we're still following a lot of pharmaceutical associated processes. I think that's what it needs to evolve a little bit more.
So it's helped you to sort of shape your thinking moving forward as you develop products or amend your processes because you've understood the regulatory framework and how to successfully complete it.
Yes, and I would say also downstream, I guess that was more of a new thing for us, at least based on our experience that we had in other jurisdictions. So in terms of label discussions, in terms of ingredient statements and all of that, again, we followed all the guidelines, but for the most part, that really helped us also shape, even when you're considering new product concepts and how are we moving forward and beyond the products we have right now, knowing that these are the guidelines, how are we going to move forward? Are we going to do a ribeye-shaped product, or are we going to go in a different direction? So I think that is critical and connects to the business side of things.
Yeah.
Don't steal our ribeye idea.
You should trademark that, ribeye-shaped.
I'll be brief. In addition to that great answer, I will say the thing that we most benefited from was the fact that everyone in the government was also not an expert in this. Everyone came at this from a different set of training, just like we were as well. No one was an expert. And I think that brought out the best in creativity from not only the regulators, but also from the company. So we worked together quite a bit on this. And I think that is what we really benefited from early on and throughout the process.
That's very helpful. I think we're out of time now. It's going up. Can you please confirm? Okay. Well, before we've run out of time, so please join me in thanking our wonderful panel for what has been a great discussion.